So, I guess I'm gonna try and talk softly because I really don't want to whisper this one. So, I was asked to kind of discuss a little bit about, parts of my life and stuff, like maybe like experiences growing up being overweight and things like that. So I thought that I would talk about the first day of 7th grade and leading up to that point. And I'm going to kind of color in this Doctor Who coloring book and chew gum, but I realized since we've moved that I have no idea where the colored pencils are. So I've got one colored pencil and 2 permanent markers. So it's not going to be the best of pictures. But that's okay. I think I'll just actually color in these little things while I talk. Okay. So I grew up in a really small town, a very rural area. And when I was in 1st grade, a family moved down the street, and they were kind of like the Brady Bunch. It was a mixed family. And one of the daughters became my childhood best friend. She practically lived at my house during the summer, and most weekends she was at my house. Her mom always wanted me to come there sometimes, but I was that type of kind of wimpy kid that just liked being in my own bed. So yeah. And we went to a very, very small elementary school. It was, let's see, there was always 2 grades in each classroom. Downstairs you had, well, with the exception of kindergarten, downstairs you had kindergarten, then 1st and 2nd grade were in the same classroom, and 3rd and 4th grade. Then upstairs you had 5th and 6th, and 7th and 8th grade. Also, again, being a very small school, sometimes even with those 2 grades combined in one classroom, there was only like 15 to 20 kids in the entire classroom. So there might only be like 8 kids per grade or something. I mean, there was 2 or 3 times that I was the only girl in the class, but since there was, or the only girl in the grade, but since there was 2 different grades in the classroom, there was always at least one other girl to talk to. So my best friend was a grade ahead of me. So we were basically in the same classroom together half the time. So when I was in 1st grade, she was in 2nd grade. And then when she moved on to 3rd grade, I was still stuck in the 1st and 2nd grade classroom because I was only in 2nd grade. So you get the idea. So yeah, we were basically joined at the hip. you know, I was a fat kid, and I don't know, she was really nice. She was thin, but she wasn't like popular or anything. I don't know, you know, at my grade school, it was so small that honestly, other than like a few random typical comments that, you know, an overweight kid might get, most of the kids were pretty nice to me. So like I have a lot of fond memories of back then. So fast forward to when I am in 6th grade and my best friend's in 7th grade. At the beginning of the school year, they kind of start to talk about how there's going to be like major budget cuts, and they're having a hard time keeping a lot of the teachers. And then towards the middle of the school year, they start to talk about how they might have to do something where they just cut out the whole junior high of the school and bus them to one of the local junior highs that's closest in the area. And that thought terrified me, like absolutely terrified me. Towards the end of the school year, I don't remember exactly when, because this was like God, 93 or something like that. Maybe it was 94. I can't remember. I feel like it was 93. Yeah, they had a vote at the town office, and unfortunately, the majority of the parents in the town decided that it would be in the best interest of all the students if we were bused to a local junior high. And I think the idea was that maybe going to a larger school would give us more options, and we might be more prepared for when it came to high school time. But I was absolutely devastated, super devastated. You know, here I was thinking, great, you know, I already stick out like a sore thumb being a fat kid who wears glasses. Now I gotta be the fat new kid who wears glasses. Like, so not cool. You know, and back then, it wasn't like it is now. You know, which is, you know, a good thing that back then it was like this, but you know, there weren't as many fat kids. You know, it was almost like you were like a token fat kid. There was like 1 or 2 in the school or something. It just meant that you stuck out a little bit more, unfortunately. And you were either the fat kid that got picked on, or you were the fat kid that was the bully, or you were the fat kid that laughed with everybody so that they wouldn't necessarily laugh at you. And unfortunately, I was the quiet, nice, walk all over me kid. But I was thinking to myself, okay, this really friggin' sucks. And I spent all summer worrying about it. By the way, we had literally one 8th grader that year at our junior high, and they had a really special graduation, 8th grade graduation, just for themselves. God, I can't remember, but I feel like we sang songs from Aladdin for her graduation. It was that long ago, folks. Yeah, so anyway, I spent all summer being really nervous about it. You know, I kept being reminded that I wouldn't be there alone. Not only would all of the 7th and 8th graders that I'd been in a classroom with since 1st grade be going to the new school too, but my best friend would be going too. We wouldn't be in the same classroom, but we'd have lunch together. We could hang out at recess. It's so weird to say recess when you're in junior high, but it technically, I don't know. I don't remember if it was called recess or it was like 15, 20 minutes that you got after lunch before you had to go back to class. So anyway, I was constantly reminded that I wouldn't be alone. Well, fast forward to August. I believe it was August. It was either August or the end of July. My mom gets a phone call. It's my best friend's mom. And it was kind of weird because usually either my best friend or I would be the ones that did all the phone talking. Like, my mom hardly ever talked to my best friend's mom. Like, she literally just lived down the street, so a lot of times she'd just show up. And I liked it that way. Yeah, so unfortunately, my best friend's mom was calling with some very unfortunate news. They were moving. Not only were they moving, but they were moving from Maine to Alabama. And not only were they moving from Maine to Alabama, but they were moving in like 3 weeks. So, saying that my world came crashing down within a matter of like a couple seconds doesn't really feel like an exaggeration, at least it didn't back then. And you know, I was 12 almost, I was going to be 13 in the middle of that September. And being that age, for a few days, my anger and anxiousness and sadness about the whole situation, my anger was really, what's the word, misplaced. Let's just say that I was angry at my best friend for a couple of days you know, my tween self was not really comprehending that, hey, it sucks for her too. In fact, it's worse for her. It's worse for her because, yes, you're both gonna have to go to a new school, but she has to literally move to a different state. She's not even gonna be around anybody or anything familiar. And it was devastating. I remember that right before she moved, we saw Hocus Pocus in the movie theater. I don't know if it came out over the summer. I don't know if it came out in July. So that's why I can't remember exactly when it was that we got the news that she was moving, but I know that she moved literally a couple weeks before school started. But I remember we went to the mall and we bought a bunch of stupid, useless junk that we didn't need. Like, I bought some Three Stooges dolls. Definitely didn't need them, and I probably just set them on a shelf and barely looked at them again, but in that moment it made us temporarily happy. And we saw, like I said, Hocus Pocus in the movie theater. Again, that's how long ago this was. Yeah, so that would make this the tail end of 1993. And then I remember getting the heads up that they were leaving, and I had said goodbye to her the day before, and we all stood on the porch and we watched them drive by our house and drive away. I don't remember if they waved or not when they left or not, but I know they were in for a very long drive. Okay. I'm sorry if this video is going to be a little long. The person that requested it kind of wanted it to be a little long. So anyway, I remember having a very hard time sleeping the night before school started. And I remember in the shower that morning, I had that nervous, nauseous feeling you get when you're excited but not for a good reason. That type of nervous where you don't know if you're gonna throw up any minute or if you're gonna burst into tears any minute. It was just awful. I felt like if anybody asked me too complicated of a question, I was gonna burst into tears. And at that point, the question, are you excited about your first day of 7th grade at a new school, would have been too complicated of a question for me to answer, so. And, you know, I got to ride the same bus that I've always ridden, same bus driver that we'd had for quite a few years, same kids on the bus. And then we got to the school which was it's about 20 minutes away from my old school. And I stepped off the bus with the rest of my classmates that I've been going to school with for years, and we all started walking down the hall. And immediately I started hearing comments like, wow, the halls sure did feel a lot lighter last year. And wow, the school really smells a lot worse this year than usual. You know, little comments like that where I knew that they were directed at me, even though I was walking in a group of kids. And to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure that the kids that I was walking with from my old school were just as nervous as I was, and they might not have even, they were probably so nervous they might not have even heard the comments. But I've always been really observant and aware of people talking about me or staring at me. And yes, sometimes it's paranoia, but unfortunately, the majority of the time, it's just fact. And I just kept hearing comments like that, and wow, the student body's gotten a lot heavier lately, and wow, it's really stinky in here, and wow, there's some ugly kids going to this school now. I don't remember exactly everything, but being a girl who's almost 13, overweight, wearing glasses, it was so much for me that by the time I found my homeroom, my glasses were so fogged up from trying to hold the tears in and not doing a good job that I could not even see my homeroom teacher when I shook his hand. It was awful. You know, when I tried to wipe the tears away so that he wouldn't notice. I'm sure he did, but he didn't want to embarrass me. And I sit down and I quickly realize that the only kid that there's 2 7th grades, the only kid that ended up with me in homeroom from my other school was a kid that I wasn't even really friendly with. I mean, I didn't have anything against him, and he'd never been really mean to me. He was kind of a little bit of a delinquent troublemaker. He wasn't mean, though. He's actually passed away quite a few years ago, so rest in peace to him. But this meant that he would be the only one from my old school that I would have in homeroom and that I'd have in any of my classes. And it was just devastating to me. So I hardly ever saw any of the other kids that I went to school with. And I'm going to take it a little bit further. I was only going to talk about the first day. But let's see. That first year was tough for me. 8th grade was amazing. I loved 8th grade. But 7th grade was hard. Within a couple of weeks, of the first day of school, I started having issues with some boys that were in the 8th grade. Now, the only time that I would see them would be at lunchtime, or unfortunately during the transition of class. If our class got out before their class, sometimes they'd still be sitting in the classroom that I needed to go into. And we were told to go into the next classroom, so I couldn't really avoid them because they were just kind of hanging out and not moving along like they were supposed to. And the first couple of times, I'd go in and sit down, and they'd just kind of talk about me like I wasn't there. And a girl that I had gone to school with forever, told them to knock it off and leave me alone, and that I'm super duper nice and they need to cut the crap, basically. Unfortunately, she wasn't always there. And there were a couple of times that I ran into that issue, and they would say things like, "Man, I wonder how heavy she is. I wonder how much she weighs." Just things trying to get a rise out of me, and I didn't give it to them because I tried to ignore them and pretend they weren't there because I was, afraid. I was a very shy kid. Nicest person you could ever meet, but just really shy and quiet and anxious. So my form of defense was just to pretend it wasn't happening. Unfortunately, there was one instance where the two boys said to themselves, I wonder if we could lift her up. And I'd like to say that compared to the bullying that so many kids get today, and even back then, some of the violent bullying and cyber stalking and bullying and stuff like that, compared to that, this seems like nothing now, but I'm not lying when I tell you that at the time, it was just so degrading and just gross for me. But they both came up to me and stood on either side of my desk, and they tried to lift me up in my desk, and they got me up a little bit, and they both laughed and strained, and then they walked away. And I just sat there in shock. And the kid from my class, who's now passed away, I don't think he really knew how to react. He didn't stick up for me. A part of him might have thought this was comforting to say, but it was just why would you say that to me? But he said, "Oh, how did you enjoy that little ride?" And I just couldn't say anything. And another girl who had been in the classroom at the time told them, that wasn't cool as they were leaving. And, you know, she tried to be nice and comforting to me, but I kind of shut down. And, you know, I managed to make it through the day. And then when I got home, my mom asked how things were. And she had known that, you know, these boys had kind of given me a little bit of problems. But, you know, I told her, it's whatever. Please don't worry about it. Well, when she asked me how the day was, and I regret this, like, still today I regret it, but I just burst into tears and told her what had happened, and she was heated. She was so heated, and you know what? I can't blame her. I would be heated too, and I honestly can't say what I would do in this position. I might do the same damn thing. Like, my husband would probably flip the frick out if someone had did that to one of our kids. But I begged her. I said, please, don't say anything. Just leave it alone. You know, it probably won't happen again. I'll deal with it. Please don't say anything. Please don't say anything. And she promised me that she would not say anything, you know, because I knew that if I got a parent involved, that I would be considered what they lovingly called back then a rat. So I just was like, no, that can't happen. Well, next thing I knew, I was in gym class, and I was called to the principal's office. And I was like, okay, what is going on? I can't remember if this was a day later or if this was a couple days later, but I was pulled in there, and I was horrified to see the principal, my mother, and the guidance counselor. And I was informed that my mom, the guidance counselor, and the principal had just had a meeting with the two boys, and that, don't worry, they won't be bothering you again. You know, and my mom's like, you know, I told them. I realized who one of them was. I know who their mother is. I know who their stepfather is. And I told them that their parents would be really disappointed to find out that they had done that. When I say that I wanted to crawl into a hole and die, I'm not exaggerating, because I knew that no matter what anyone at that table said, I knew that my mom had sealed my fate. And I was so angry with her, so angry with her. Because unfortunately, those two boys did leave me alone. But what happened after that was 10 times worse for me. One of their friends that was a girl made it a point to make my life a living hell for the rest of the school year. She would follow me around. She would call me Banana Boat, and I knew what that meant because I had just seen an episode of Who's the Boss where Angela had talked about how, because she was so big, the kids used to call her Banana Boat. and she would call me a woolly mammoth. And when the teachers weren't looking, which was often, at the little recess time, she'd throw little pebbles at me. Like, she was just horrible to me. And I overheard the boys saying at lunch, this is how observant I am. They were sitting like 5 tables away. And I heard them and saw them motion towards me with their fork, how much they'd like to stab me. So I went from being the victim to them thinking they were the victims and that I was the bad guy. And meanwhile, they just don't understand that my best friend just moved away. I had to change schools. I'm a fat kid with glasses. I'm just trying to freaking make it through the day alive, man. Like, just trying to make it to school, do my work, keep my head down, and make it through the day. But no, because of how the situation was handled, and again, I can't really blame my mom because I'm pretty sure that most other parents would have done the same thing. But because of how it was handled, you know, I was considered a snitch. And the treatment that I got for that was just 10 times worse. And it's funny because even though I never got an apology from one of these boys, I did have them in a class in high school, and they were fairly nice to me in that class. They probably didn't feel the need to apologize to me, but I was just okay with, you know, them being decent to me at that point. The girl, though, she was a freaking bitch. Like, 8th grade was wonderful for me because they were all gone that whole time, all gone. And I had come out of my shell a little bit and made some friends. In high school, I had 3 classes with this girl. And she still was rotten to me. You know, I was so stupid. I actually tell my son, you know, I don't advocate violence, but if someone is harassing you and they won't leave you alone, and you've asked them to stop, and they want to try and put their hands on you, defend yourself. You might get in trouble with the school, but you're not going to get in trouble with me and your father. You know, I wish that I had been like that. But then again, you just never know. I mean, some of these kids are just nuts. I mean, they could come at you with a knife or something. But anyway, she was rotten to me in high school too. And you know, the scary thing for me is that people always say, oh, all these bullies, they're only bullies when their friends are around, when they can show off, but one-on-one they're different. There was a couple times that I was walking to my mom's work from high school, and she was on the other side of the street, and she was making like pretend death threat motions towards me, and she was by herself. So God, I think the stupidest thing I did in high school in regards to this chick is that she was in my science class, and she asked me if I would move over a seat so that when her friend came, they could sit next to each other. You know, and I thought to myself, I don't really care where I sit. Maybe if I do this, it will open up her being a little nicer to me, you know, kind of like me throwing out an olive branch or something. So I said, sure. I go to stand up, and the science teacher, who I think had heard the conversation and knew how bitchy this chick was, looked at me, pointed at my seat, and said, don't you dare move. You sit right there. And I was like, okay. And then when her friend comes in a few minutes later, she says to her, yeah, we almost got to sit next to each other, but you know, fatty old woolly mammoth over there ruined it. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? So it's just, I don't even know why I would have bothered, but yeah, I don't know, this is running really long, guys. All right, well, that's that for now.